I didn't hang up, but I'm going to have to log back in.
Panel.
Okay. Welcome, everybody. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the fourth in our documentation series, How to Coach DSPs for Better Documentation Results. Team, and she's going to be presenting this information that was presented as part of our on-the-road technical assistance training at the end of April and beginning of May. But this way, everything is together for you as one complete set that you can access on our webpage so that you have a compendium of documentation training materials that you can use as a resource for your staff. So it is my pleasure to turn this over to Lisa.
Hi everyone. Like Gayla said, this is the fourth in our series on documentation, and this is aimed at those of you who teach and coach your DSPs in documentation. So what we're going to cover today is what's important for you to know as the trainer, and then also give you some training resources that you can expand upon for your agency and give to your DSPs as they're out there doing their documentation. So we'll start with what's important for you to know. One of the really important things for you to have a good handle on and understanding of is the administrative rules, which are both found in the Iowa Administrative Code and the provider manuals. In the Iowa Administrative Code, you're going to concentrate on chapters 77, 78, 79, and 83. Chapter 77 is the condition of participation for Medicaid providers, and that's going to tell you what you as a provider need to have in place, whether that be policies, training requirements. The incident reporting rules are in Chapter 77. Any certifications you need to have to be enabled to provide that service. All of those things you're going to find in Iowa Administrative Code 77. In 44178, that's where you're going to find your scope of service. For each of the Medicaid services, that's going to tell you what you can do for each service component, also what's excluded from each service component. The only thing different from HCBS waiver and habilitation services is that you will also find the eligibility requirements for habilitation services in Chapter 78. Chapter 79 is the financial and record keeping section of the rules. What you're going to find in there is cost reporting rules for services we continue to provide directly through the state, not the MCOs. You're going to find your rates. You're also going to find the documentation requirements in Chapter 79.3, Parent 2, number 3, A3, and that's going to tell you what all is required in documentation for all services. You're also going to find your record retention requirements in this chapter. The provider manuals interpret the Iowa Administrative Code, so you're going to have a broader description of what each one of those rules mean in the provider manual. So it's important that you are aware of what's in both of those documents. The scope of service, like I said, you'll find in Chapter 78, and it's really critical that you understand the components of each service you're providing so that you can give that to your staff. Many of our staff are providing multiple services, so it's important that they know the difference between if I'm providing, for instance, supported community living under the ID waiver versus home-based habilitation under habilitation services. Those services are very, very similar in the service components, but they have some very important differences. For instance, in supported community living under ID, transportation to and from day activities, work, those kind of things are all included as part of that service. Under home-based habilitation, transportation to and from a day program is specifically excluded from that service. So it's important for your staff to know what each of those services allow and what they don't allow. For Chapter 78, I put up this slide, so this gives you the parent number for each one of the waiver services as well as habilitation. What I typically do is I'll go to Iowa Administrative Code Chapter 78, do a Control F, and then put in the parent number of the service that I want to review. That just saves me time from scrolling through. I would really encourage you to always go back and check the rules, because they change occasionally, and maybe you missed an informational letter and you didn't realize that a rule changed. So, you know, if someone's saying, can I do this under habilitation, home-based habilitation, you know, it's always good to double check yourself and go back and look at that rule and what does it specifically say, so that you don't give your staff bad information. The provider manuals are both listed here with links to them. You'll find the scope of services on pages 78 or pages 27 through 90 in the HCBS manual, and 22 through 50 in the habilitation manual. The habilitation manual does a really good job of giving various scenarios for services and saying, okay, in this scenario, the service would be covered, but in this scenario, it would not. So it really gives you a good picture of what they mean for that specific component of the service. The other thing that it's really important for good documentation is that you have well-written plans. Well-written plans will lead your staff to having good documentation. One of the things that I've seen in my agency over the years is that we'll have an objective for habilitation services that says, Gala would like to participate in habilitation services. And then we're surprised when the documentation is a very detailed list of everything that Gala did throughout that documentation, throughout that service, but nothing the staff did. Well, the goal was Gala will participate in the services, so the staff wrote down how she participated. So, you know, really working with writing good plans. And my colleague April did a webinar on this, and it's on the IACP website, where she just did a really good job of how you can write very clear, concise plans to really allow your staff then to read that goal, the objective, the teaching procedure, action steps, whatever you call those in your agency, and then use those as well as the barriers to help basically give your staff a roadmap to how to write their documentation. So this is where you can find the recording, and here is the slide deck. One of the slides from that presentation is listed here, and it just goes over the components of a clear objective. So your staff who are writing your service plans, you know, can they answer yes to these questions? Are the conditions clear so everybody knows how or when they should be working on this particular goal and objective? You know, is the behavior overt? Is it something people can see? Do they know when the person is doing it, or is it written very vague, such as, you know, Gala wants to manage her mental health symptoms today. I don't know what that looks like for Gala, you know, but if it says Gala will practice her affirmations each morning, I can see that. That's an overt skill. Is the skill really the behavior that I want to see change? Does it really describe what are we trying to teach? What is this person wanting to learn through working on this particular skill? Is it written for the client and not the staff? Is this something the client says, yes, this is what I want to do, this is how I want to do it? Or is it written for your staff to do something? Is it specific to one skill and not compounded? The other thing that I have seen throughout the years is that in our effort to be efficient, we will write an objective that looks something like Lisa will complete her daily hygiene, take her medication, and be on time for her job every 5 out of 7 days. You know, how do I know when I've actually met that objective? You know, do I meet it if I got to work on time, but I never showered and I didn't take my medication? You know, so, you know, don't compound it. Make it so that it's clear so that everybody, your staff, and as importantly or more importantly, the member you're serving understands what they're working on. And do I have enough performance criteria so that it's not a one and done type objective? So do I have an objective that says Lisa will make a monthly budget, and the first month of that objective I'm making a monthly budget, therefore I'm done? You know, or is there enough criteria that says Lisa will make a monthly budget each month and follow her budget 4 out of the next 6 months? You know, so you need some time there. Is it positive and strength-based? Is it does it state what you want what the person wants to do versus what they're not supposed to do? So, you know, Lisa wants to maintain good friendships. The objective is that I will maintain personal space when I'm interacting with peers. Or does it say Lisa will maintain good friendships, Lisa will not hit or swear at her peers? You know, so keeping it positive. So then the documentation requirements, like we said, they are in Iowa Administrative Code 79.3 and the provider manuals, and you have the links for those earlier in this presentation. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go over the manuals and what they say in each manual, because there's a different focus in each manual. So you have the same rules in the Iowa Administrative Code, but how the manual interprets those rules are different between HCBS services and habilitation services. So the HCBS manual says the record for each service provided shall include information necessary to substantiate the service was provided and shall include the following. So what they're interested in there is your documentation for HCBS services has to substantiate that this service was actually provided. The way you're going to do that is by listing the specific procedures or treatments performed. So what did staff do throughout that time period that you're billing for? The complete date of the service, including the beginning and ending date, if the service was rendered over a period of days. So when you have, I'm thinking of the job coaching tiers, which are a monthly tier, you know, the beginning and ending date of when you provided those services. The complete time of the service, including AM and PM. I think this is a review for everyone, but you know, just making sure that you're always including AM and PM, because that can have a significant change, especially if you're billing something on a 15-minute unit or an hourly basis. The location where the service was provided. Over the years, we've had a lot of questions about what does that have to look like, and you're going to need to determine the specifics of that within your own agency. I have heard everything from people requiring that their staff put the full address, you know, street address, town, state, in their documentation, to where people say, you know what, if you put the town and the location, you're good. Our particular agency goes with, you know what, you need the town, the location. If there's more than one of those locations, in rural Iowa, we tend to have more than one Casey's store in some of our towns. So which Casey's did you go to? And then also, because we're very close to both the Minnesota and South Dakota border, we tell our staff, if ever you're out of the state of Iowa, which we are on occasion, then you need to list the state as well. So you really need to determine what's best for your services and where you feel comfortable that you are confident that whoever reads this documentation, they will be able to clearly see where that service was provided. When we talk to Leanne Moskowitz, that's what she says. I need to be able to clearly see where that service was provided. So then you determine how you can best do that within your agency and with however you do documentation. She also says that you know, as long as you say services were provided in the member's home, that's clear enough for when you provide services in their actual home. The next one is the name, dosage, and route of administration of any medication dispensed. Again, we have a lot of questions about that. One of the questions we have is, you know, is the MAR sufficient? Our understanding is that you're going to want something in the narrative that says, I administered Lisa's AM meds to her. The MAR is the medication administration record, is going to include the name, the dosage, the route of administration, and the medication that was dispensed. Another question that we had recently was, is a MAR required? And if you're doing HCBS services in a non-licensed site, so it's not licensed by DIA, in reality, a MAR is not required. If you don't use a MAR, however, you would have to list the complete name, the dosage, the route for each medication you're administering. So I think that is riddled with issues that, you know, that means all your staff have to be able to spell all those names because, you know, a misspelling could be a different medication. So while it's not required, I don't know of any other efficient way to document med administration other than using a MAR. So my very strong encouragement to you is, of course, use the MAR. Any supplies dispensed as part of the service, that's pretty a non-factor for most of our services because we don't dispense supplies as part of the service. The first and last name and professional credentials, if any, of the person providing the service. If you have a signature log, it can be initials and not a signature of the person providing the services. For 24-hour care, documentation for every shift. This is another one that we often get questions about, and people say, so if Lisa leaves services on Friday afternoon to spend the weekend with her family, doesn't return until Sunday afternoon, do I need documentation for after she left Friday night, all day Saturday, and until she returned on Sunday? Again, there are some providers out there who really want their staff to put something in the log that says, Lisa was gone with family during my shift. If that's what you decide, you certainly can tell your staff to do that. If what you tell your staff is document on Friday afternoon that Lisa left at 4:35 with her family for the weekend, you don't do any more documentation until Sunday afternoon, where you document Lisa returned from a visit with her family at 2:15. That is perfectly fine as well. So that again is something that you in your agency are going to need to decide how you want to do that and what you feel most comfortable with. Then the Habilitation Manual. And I just want to point out how the lead-in in the Habilitation Manual is different from the HCBS Manual. This one, the provider's file for each Medicaid member must include progress notes for each date of service that detail specific services rendered related to the habilitation covered service. So that's much more detailed than the HCBS Manual, which simply says you need to substantiate the services rendered. Here we're looking for progress, we're looking for specific services rendered. So your note is going to be more detailed. It must include the following items for included in each progress note for each date of service. The date and amount of time of services, that's the same thing. This is a little different. The first and last name and title of the provider staff actually rendering service. So when that rule changed back in 2007 in the provider manual that no longer required us to provide titles, somehow that never made it to the Habilitation Manual. Now, when we were doing services for just IME, that wasn't a big deal because they knew the rule changed and they were fine. MCOs, however, their manuals state that they follow the state's manual and Iowa Administrative Code. So at least UHC was holding providers to that they had the title of their provider staff. About 2 years ago, UHC came in and did an audit of our services, and they said that none of our habilitation services were billable because we didn't have the title of the staff person who provided the service. We had professional credentials if they had professional credentials. So just be aware of that. I am not sure how Iowa Total Care will interpret that, and I'm not clear on how AmeriGroup is interpreting that, as we haven't been audited by them, but the manual does state title. The place of the service, location where the service was actually rendered, that's the same thing. A description of the specific components of the Medicaid payable habilitation service being provided, using service description terminology. So this, you're going to want to pull this description terminology right out of the scope of service. And that's going to need to show up somewhere on your documentation. Now, it could show up in the barriers, it could show up in the goal, or it could show up in the actual documentation. But you need to include that specific description terminology in that progress note. Name, dosage, and route of administration of medication is the same. The nature, extent, and number of units of the habilitation service. The progress note must describe what specifically was done and include the progress and barriers to achieving the goal. This also is more extensive than the HCBS manual. So many of us are, I think, had added to our documentation a nice little checkbox that said, Lisa made progress, yes or no. That's not going to be enough under habilitation services. You're going to have to explain why Lisa didn't make progress. You know, what prevented me from making progress on this goal. So again, that's a much more clinical note expectation than what's expected in habilitation services. And at least with UHC, when they came back a year later and reviewed some of our HCBS notes, they were looking for some of the same things. So one of the things with MCOs is they very much come from the medical model, so they're very much looking for a more clinical note. So with that, we'll move into training resources. And these are just things that you're going to want to develop for your staff. One of the things is give them a list of the scope of service for each service that they're providing, so that they have that with them, that's in front of them. You need to decide how much you need to describe what each one of those services is. You know your staff well. So in some cases, you're going to provide, okay, what does this mean? Assure that they understand each member's service plan. It's one thing that, you know, obviously every service we provide needs to be in the scope of service, but it also needs to be authorized in that person's plan. So make sure that your staff know that not only do I need to know the scope of service, I need to know which services out of that scope of service I need to provide to Lisa. And then suggest that you develop some sort of FAQ documentation. And how we develop that for our agency is really looking at the most frequent mistakes and what staff most frequently ask us. You know, that's why it's called an FAQ. Have some common intervention terminology. Again, we're looking to teach people who really have no clinical background. You know, they're good, they're hardworking people who want to do their jobs well, but they didn't go to school and learn how to write clinically. So you want to give them some common terminology, the intervention terminology they can use. You want to develop a template that gives them kind of a roadmap and a pattern to how to write good documentation. And you want to have a uniform way to train all your DSP and direct line supervisors so that you can be confident that everybody's getting the same message around documentation. If you're a smaller agency, I would highly suggest that you have one person train all your new people. Our agency is larger and that doesn't really work, so we really work hard to have one person train all our direct line supervisors. But whatever works for your agency. So this is just an example of a scope of service. So you might have someone, we have DSPs who certainly would provide all three of these services, and it's important that they know what is each of the service components. Again, depending, you know your staff better, so if you need to write a definition of what adaptive skill development is, what are some examples of that, you'll want to do that and expand on this document. Some examples of an FAQ: when do I need to complete documentation? Within 24 hours after providing the service. The within 24 hours is an expectation from UHC for habilitation services. That's going to be important at least till June 30. We'll want to see what Iowa Total Care has in their provider manual regarding that. We have always asked our staff to do this just because very few of us have memories well enough to document 3 days later to the detail that we need to document on. So, you know, whether it's a requirement or not, it certainly is best practice. The other thing we tell staff is you must never document prior to providing a service. Doing so would be considered fraud. So, you know, even if somebody, you know, you provide the same supports, they respond pretty much the same way every day, you cannot document before you've actually provided the service. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what actual services you're going to provide. You have a plan, but things change. How much should I document? We've kind of learned this one the hard way, you know, so if you say, well, you know what, you really need 3 sentences for every hour you provide, you're going to get 3 sentences for every hour you provide. They may or may not say anything that allows you to bill for that service, but you will get 3 sentences because our staff want to do their jobs well, and they're going to do what you tell them to do. So how we've answered this question, we say ask, is what document something that should take that amount of time? Does my note clearly show that I provided support skill building throughout the shift? And remember, your notes need to have what's necessary in them, but they don't need to be full-length documentaries. So, you know, having your staff really think about what am I trying to tell people? Another one, if I'm working with 4 members, it is okay to copy documentation from one to another because they all do the same thing. You know, so, you know, we make it very clear that no, copying and pasting is never okay. All your documentation has to be specific to the person you're documenting on and their encounter. Cutting and pasting is never allowed. That includes cutting and pasting for that specific person from one day to the next. So, you know, what is a good note? Ask yourself, if I read this tomorrow or next week, would I be? And list all of those things. You know, if you can answer yes to all of these questions, your note's probably going to be good. Your QA person probably isn't going to ask you to rewrite it because you have everything you need in there. This is just a joke, and I think our staff feel this frustration many times. Okay, I've now written 5 things, but I can't remember what I really was supposed to do here. So this is an example of common intervention terminology. I think this is also a handout that we'll put on our website so that you can print it off and it's actually readable. There's nothing magical about this. We actually found this by Googling common intervention terminology, and this came up. So, you know, whatever works for you, but this gives your staff kind of a starting point of what words can I use. And then I think this is really an incredibly good resource. Again, my colleague April put this together. And it's just a template, an example. It gives people the sentence structure of what a good documentation would look like. So it starts with staff and then a verb. What did you do? The action you took. So then you go to your common terminology and you have supported, reviewed, explained, assisted, developed, provided, modeled, you know, whatever you did, which also hopefully is in your action steps and teaching procedures of your objective. And then the skill, you know. So I supported Lisa in what skill? Was it an activity of daily living? Was it, you know, advocacy? What did I do? Was it personal management? So I supported Lisa in personal management by, and then you're going to look at your action steps again. So what are my instructions? How am I going to help Lisa with this? And then I'm going to say how Lisa responded to it. Lisa responded to this teaching skill by, and whatever I did. And then Lisa did or did not make progress, and then why I did not make progress. So that's the template. And this one is for HCBS SEL services. You can put something like this together for whatever service your staff is providing. And then this is just an example. Staff model a social skill by engaging Sally in a conversation around her weekend outing with her family. Sally responded to this teaching skill by openly sharing about a funny experience. Sally made progress by blah, blah, blah. So, you know, you can give people these examples and they can follow this template. Now, I would suggest not putting, you know, the boxes around your documentation, but when you're teaching it, this is a good way to teach it. And here's just another example. Staff reviewed the personal care skill of how to wash Joan's hair by talking through the steps of washing, rinsing, and then conditioning. Joan responded to this teaching skill by. Joan made progress by. And again, you know, if Joan is someone who needed physical assistance in washing her hair, your staff reviewed the personal care of how to wash her hair by talking her through her steps and then assisting her in rinsing out her conditioner or whatever the skill was. So, but this just gives your staff a visual pattern of how do I actually write this? They know what they did, but again, you know, if my educational background didn't teach me clinical skills, and most of our DSPs do not have that clinical background, this gives them the template on how to do that. So, are there any questions, Gayla?
I'm not seeing anything, Lisa, and I can't think of anything that you didn't already cover based on the feedback we got when we were doing this live. I think you've got it.
Okay. Well, thank you for your time, and I hope this is helpful.
Thanks, Lisa. Great training.